Let me tell you a story that starts like many others but ends in a way you would never see coming. It's about a man named Daniel, charming, successful, and seemingly devoted to his wife, Lisa. They had been married for 5 years, built a life together, and were expecting their first child. To Lisa, their love was unbreakable. But she didn't know that while she was busy preparing for their child's arrival, Daniel was busy building something else, an escape plan. It all started when Daniel met Veronica. She was everything Lisa wasn't: young, adventurous, and wild. At least, that's how Daniel justified his betrayal. To him, Lisa had become predictable, too consumed with their growing family, too wrapped up in preparing for their future. And in his selfish mind, he saw it as a burden rather than a blessing. At first, it was just flirtation, a secret thrill that made Daniel feel alive in a way he hadn't in years. But soon the affair escalated. Veronica became more than just an escape, she became an obsession. Late-night texts turned into stolen weekends, and before Daniel knew it, he was ready to leave it all behind. His home, his marriage, his unborn child. He convinced himself that Lisa would be fine, that she was strong and would move on. He ignored the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke of their baby's future, the way she still reached for his hand in the middle of the night. Then came the night he told Lisa the truth. He expected tears, anger, maybe even a breakdown. But Lisa just stared at him, silent, as if he had become a stranger overnight. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, controlled. "You'll regret this, Daniel," she said, not as a threat, but as a statement of fact. And for a fleeting moment, a cold shiver ran down his spine. But he shook it off and left, eager to start his new life with Veronica. For a while, things were perfect, or so he thought. Veronica welcomed him with open arms, showering him with affection and passion. She made him feel like he had made the right choice. They traveled, laughed, and lived recklessly. He convinced himself that he had won, that he had traded a dull life for an exciting one. But slowly things started to change. Veronica became distant. She was moody, unpredictable. Some days she was the woman he had fallen for, vibrant and full of life. Other days she was cold, detached, almost cruel. At first, Daniel thought it was just the natural shift in a relationship, but soon, it became clear that something was terribly wrong. And then one evening she disappeared. No calls, no messages, nothing. Daniel searched everywhere, but Veronica was gone without a trace. Just as he began to panic, he found a single letter on their bed, written in her elegant handwriting. His hands trembled as he opened it. "Daniel, you thought you had it all figured out, didn't you? You thought you could just walk away from your past, from the people who loved you, without consequences. But life doesn't work that way. Actions have consequences, Daniel. You took everything from Lisa, from your child. And now it's your turn to lose. By the time you read this, it will already be too late. Consider this my gift to you, a taste of the destruction you brought upon others. Welcome to your new life. Alone. Broken. Just like the family you left behind." Daniel's heart pounded as he read the final words. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. But nothing could prepare him for what was about to come next. Something much worse was waiting for him in the shadows. Daniel sat frozen, the letter crumpled in his shaking hands. His mind raced. What did Veronica mean? What had she done? His heart pounded in his chest, an unsettling sense of dread creeping over him. He tried calling her, but her phone was disconnected. He checked their apartment, her favorite cafes, even the places they used to sneak away to when they first started their affair. She was nowhere to be found. Then came the emails. The first one arrived that night, just as Daniel was beginning to think he had imagined it all. It was from an anonymous sender. The subject line simply read, "Karma." With a deep breath, he clicked it open. "You took something precious. Now something will be taken from you." A chill ran down his spine. He replied instantly, demanding to know who it was, but no response came. Over the next few days, more emails followed, cryptic, taunting, filled with eerie warnings. Daniel tried to ignore them, but then the real torment began. Strange things started happening. His bank accounts were suddenly drained. His credit cards declined. His boss called him into the office looking grave. "Daniel, we received some disturbing allegations about you. We have no choice but to let you go." No amount of pleading could save his job. Then his card disappeared. Stolen, or so he thought, until he received another email. "Everything you built on lies will crumble. Just like you left Lisa and your child, you will be left with nothing." Panic set in. He tried reaching out to Lisa, but she refused to answer his calls. Desperate, he drove to their old home, hoping, praying she would take pity on him. But when he arrived, the house was empty. Gone. like she had never lived there. Neighbors avoided his gaze, whispering behind his back. No one knew where Lisa had gone. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. And then he saw it. Pinned to his car windshield was another note, the handwriting unmistakably similar to Veronica's. "You think you're losing everything now? This is only the beginning. The real nightmare is yet to come." Daniel's world was spinning. He had thought he was in control, thought he had made the right choices. But now it was clear, someone had been planning this. Someone had orchestrated his downfall, piece by piece. And as the days passed, the torment escalated. Shadows followed him at night. Mysterious figures lurked outside his window. His phone would ring, but when he answered, only silence greeted him. Then one evening, as he sat in his empty apartment, drowning in regret, there was a knock at the door. A slow, deliberate knock that sent a chill down his spine. With trembling hands he opened it, and what he saw on the other side made his blood run cold. Lisa was standing there. But she was not alone. And the truth she was about to reveal would shatter Daniel's world forever. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he stared at Lisa. She looked different, stronger, colder. Her once warm eyes now held an unsettling intensity. But it wasn't just her presence that rattled him. It was the man standing beside her. Tall, composed, and exuding a quiet confidence, the stranger locked eyes with Daniel. There was something eerily familiar about him, though Daniel couldn't quite place it. Lisa broke the silence. "May we come in?" Daniel hesitated but stepped aside. As they entered, a heavy tension filled the air. Lisa walked in with an air of control, surveying the apartment like she was taking stock of his misery. The man, however, kept his eyes fixed on Daniel, studying him with an unreadable expression. Finally, Daniel couldn't take it anymore. "What is this? What are you doing here?" His voice was laced with frustration but also fear. Lisa took a deep breath, her lips curling into something that resembled a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "I told you, Daniel. You'd regret everything." His stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" Lisa exchanged a glance with the man beside her before continuing. "Did you really think you could just walk away? That you could destroy a family and suffer no consequences? Life doesn't work that way." Daniel scoffed, trying to mask his unease. "What is this, some kind of revenge?" Lisa let out a small laugh. "Oh, Daniel. This isn't revenge. This is justice." Daniel's jaw clenched. "What does that mean?" The man finally spoke. His voice was calm, calculated. "It means your life as you know it is over." Daniel's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" The man smiled for the first time. "Let's just say, I'm someone who knows exactly what it feels like to have everything stolen." Before Daniel could respond, Lisa pulled out a folder from her bag and placed it on the table in front of him. "Open it." With shaking hands, Daniel flipped it open. Inside were documents, bank transactions, email exchanges, legal papers. His eyes darted from one page to the next, his confusion growing with every second. But then, his breath hitched as he recognized a familiar name, his own, next to something unthinkable. A death certificate. His own death certificate. The room spun. His mouth went dry. What is this?" Lisa leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel, you don't exist anymore." His hands trembled as he looked at the legal papers. His assets had been seized, his identity wiped. His entire existence, erased. It was as if he had never been born. Lisa stood up and walked toward the door, pausing just before stepping out. She turned to look at him one last time. "You walked away from your family for another woman. Now, the whole world has walked away from you." The man followed, but before leaving he gave Daniel a final, knowing glance. "Consider this your reckoning." And just like that, they were gone. Daniel sat there, his hands still clutching the death certificate, his mind spiraling. His phone buzzed. An email notification. He clicked it open, dread filling his gut. This is only the beginning. Daniel let out a shaky breath. The nightmare was far from over. Daniel sat frozen, his fingers gripping the edges of the death certificate as if letting go would somehow make it disappear. His heart pounded against his ribs. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of elaborate joke, some twisted game Lisa was playing to punish him. But deep down he knew better. His phone buzzed again. Another email. The subject line sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through his veins. No name. No future. With a trembling hand he opened it. "Everything you once owned is gone. Your accounts, your job, your credibility. You don't exist in the system anymore, Daniel. Try using your ID. Try calling the police. Try reaching out for help. It won't matter. You're a ghost now. Just like you made your family feel." A cold sweat formed on his brow. He lunged for his wallet, pulling out his driver's license. But when he looked at it, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't his name anymore. It wasn't even his face. The ID he had carried for years now bore someone else's picture, someone else's identity. His name, his information, gone, replaced by a stranger. His pulse pounded in his ears. He grabbed his laptop and searched his name. Nothing. No records, no social media, no digital footprint. It was as if he had never existed. Panicked, he stumbled to his front door, yanking it open and rushing outside. He needed someone to see him, to acknowledge him. But as he ran down the street, calling out to strangers, no one paid him any attention. Then he tried his last resort, the police station. Bursting through the doors, he gasped for breath as he approached the officer at the front desk. "Please, you have to help me," he pleaded. "Something's happened. Someone's stolen my identity. I'm Daniel Carter." The officer squinted at him before pulling up a screen. "Daniel Carter, you said?" Daniel nodded desperately. The officer's fingers moved over the keyboard. Then he frowned. "There's no record of anyone by that name." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. No, that's impossible." "Check again." "My wife, Lisa Carter, she'll tell you?" The officer's expression darkened. "Lisa Carter?" Daniel's heart leapt. "Yes, that's my wife. She'll tell you who I am." The officer gave him a long, hard look before turning the screen toward him. Lisa Carter was declared a widow 3 months ago. Her husband, Daniel Carter, was pronounced dead in an accident. Daniel's world cracked apart. "No," he whispered. "No, I'm right here. I'm alive. But the officer's hand was already reaching for his radio. "Sir, I need you to step back." Daniel's head spun. He couldn't breathe. He turned on his heel and bolted from the station before they could detain him. His feet pounded against the pavement as he ran, aimlessly, mindlessly, like a hunted animal. By the time he stopped, his lungs burned, his legs felt like lead. He collapsed onto a bench, staring at his shaking hands. Everything was gone. No job, no money, no name, no way out. And then another email arrived. "You should have chosen differently, Daniel. Now the real suffering begins." As Daniel stared at the screen, a shadow moved across the pavement beside him. He looked up and his breath hitched. Veronica stood before him, smiling. But something about that smile chilled him to the bone. Daniel's body tensed as he locked eyes with Veronica. The woman he had once left everything for stood before him, but something was different. Her smile wasn't the warm, seductive one he remembered. It was cold, calculating. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, tilting her head slightly. Daniel swallowed hard. "What the hell is going on, Veronica? What did you do?" She let out a soft chuckle and took a step closer. "Me? I didn't do anything, Daniel. You did this to yourself." His fists clenched. "I don't exist anymore. My bank accounts, my identity, everything is gone. Lisa, His voice broke as his mind struggled to process it all. "Lisa made it look like I died. She erased me. And somehow you're involved." Veronica knelt beside him, her fingers tracing the edge of the bench he sat on. "Oh, Daniel," she said, voice laced with mock sympathy. "Did you really think you could betray people and just move on? That you could leave destruction in your wake and never have to pay for it?" His pulse pounded. "You think I deserve this?" She nodded slowly. "Absolutely." His mind reeled. Veronica had been his escape, his salvation from a life he no longer wanted. She had promised him a future, but now she was standing before him as a piece of his downfall. "Why?" he asked hoarsely. "Why help destroy me?" Veronica sighed, almost as if she were bored of his questions. "Because I was never yours, Daniel." "Not really." His stomach dropped. "What?" Her lips curled into a smirk. "I was never your mistress. I was never in love with you. I was part of something bigger." A cold shiver crawled down his spine. "What are you talking about?" She leaned in, her lips inches from his ear. "You were the target, Daniel. From the very beginning." His breath caught. His mind flashed back to every moment they had shared, the way she had pursued him, how easy it had all felt. It hadn't been fate. It had been a trap. "You," he couldn't finish the sentence. "Lisa knew." Veronica laughed, standing up. "Lisa planned it, and I played my role perfectly." His hands shook. "You mean, Lisa wanted me to cheat? Lisa wanted you to show your true colors. And you did. All we had to do was give you the opportunity. And now," she gestured around, Now you get to feel what abandonment feels like. Daniel's world spiraled into chaos. His love affair, his choices, his betrayal, it had all been orchestrated. He hadn't left Lisa. Lisa had let him go, knowing he would destroy himself. His breathing turned shallow. Where is she? Veronica's expression darkened. Gone. Just like you. His vision blurred. He had lost everything, but now he realized the worst part. He had never been in control at all. Veronica leaned down one last time, whispering in his ear. This is only the beginning. Then she walked away, leaving Daniel in the wreckage of his own choices. And for the first time he truly understood what it meant to be powerless. Daniel sat motionless on the cold bench, his thoughts a whirlwind of chaos. The weight of Veronica's words pressed down on him like an unbearable force. Every moment he had shared with her, every whisper, every promise, it had all been a carefully constructed illusion. He was never the player. He had always been the pawn. But why? What was the endgame? His fingers dug into his temples as he tried to think. Lisa had set him up. Veronica had played along. His entire downfall had been orchestrated, and now he was erased from existence. But the question that burned in his mind was, why go to such lengths? His heart pounded as realization crept over him. It wasn't just revenge. Lisa wasn't trying to punish him. She was trying to bury him. A sharp gust of wind blew past, but Daniel barely felt it. He needed answers. He needed to find Lisa. But how does a dead man find someone who wants him to stay buried? His phone vibrated in his pocket. He hesitated before pulling it out, half expecting another ominous message. But this time it wasn't an email. It was a text. Unknown number, Pier 17. Midnight. No cops. His heart thudded. Was this a setup? Another part of the game? Or was this his only chance at unraveling the nightmare he was trapped in? Daniel clenched his jaw. He had no choice. By the time he reached Pier 17, the city had fallen into an eerie stillness. The murky waters reflected the moonlight, creating an unsettling glow. Daniel scanned the area, his breath visible in the cold air. Then he saw her. Lisa. She stood near the edge of the dock, her face unreadable. Beside her stood a man Daniel didn't recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, his face hidden beneath the shadows of his hood. Daniel took cautious steps forward. Lisa, he breathed, barely believing she was real. She didn't move, didn't speak. The silence between them stretched, thick with tension and unspoken truths. Finally, she tilted her head. You look terrible, she said, her voice devoid of the warmth he once knew. Daniel let out a humorless chuckle. Being erased will do that to you. The man beside Lisa shifted slightly but remained silent. Daniel's gaze hardened. Tell me why, Lisa. Why go this far? Lisa's expression didn't change. Because you never deserved the life you had. And now, you finally understand what it means to lose everything. His fists clenched. That's not good enough. You didn't just take revenge. You erased me. This was bigger than just a broken marriage. What the hell is really going on? Lisa exhaled slowly, then looked at the man beside her. A silent exchange passed between them before she finally spoke. You were never supposed to leave, she said quietly. But once you did, we had to move forward without you. Daniel frowned. What are you talking about? Lisa took a step forward, her gaze piercing. Did you ever wonder how easily you were lured away? How perfectly timed everything was? His stomach twisted. What do you mean? Lisa's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Daniel, did you ever stop to think that you were meant to leave? His breath hitched. What? Lisa's expression was unreadable, but the next words that left her lips sent ice through his veins. This was never about you, Daniel. It was about what you were keeping me from. Daniel's mind raced. Keeping her from what? The man beside Lisa finally spoke, his voice deep and deliberate. She had to get rid of you, Daniel. You were in the way. Daniel's pulse spiked. In the way of what? Lisa's eyes darkened, and for the first time, he felt like he had never truly known the woman he married. Of who I was meant to be. Daniel took a shaky step back as the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't revenge. This was a plan years in the making. And he was only beginning to understand just how deep it went. Daniel's breath came in short, ragged bursts as the reality of Lisa's words settled into his bones. His mind spun, desperate to grasp what she was saying, to find a way to make it make sense. But no matter which way he turned it, only one terrifying truth emerged. This had never been about his betrayal. It had been about Lisa's freedom. A lump formed in his throat. Lisa, he said, forcing his voice to stay steady, what the hell do you mean? What was I keeping you from? She smiled. Not a grin of victory, not a smirk of malice, but a knowing, almost peaceful smile. My real life, she said simply. Daniel shook his head. That doesn't mean anything. The hooded man finally stepped forward. His face remained mostly in shadow, but as he moved, Daniel caught a glimpse of something. A scar running down his cheek, cutting through a stubbled jaw. The man's voice was deep, deliberate. It means she was never meant to be your wife, Daniel. Daniel's stomach twisted into knots. Who the hell are you? The man tilted his head. I go by many names, but to Lisa, I am the beginning of everything. Daniel turned back to Lisa, who was watching him carefully, as if weighing how much to tell him. He swallowed the bile rising in his throat. Lisa, he said again, softer now. Tell me the truth. I deserve that much. She exhaled slowly. You do, she admitted. But I don't think you're ready for it. Daniel's patience snapped. I lost everything, Lisa. My job, my money, my identity, you made sure of that. The least you can do is tell me why. She didn't even flinch. You were a placeholder, Daniel. A necessary illusion. That's all. His vision blurred. A placeholder? He had loved her. He had built a life with her. And now she was telling him that none of it was real? I don't believe you, he said through clenched teeth. You loved me. I know you did. Lisa tilted her head slightly. I cared for you, she admitted. But love. Her voice softened. Daniel, I was never yours. The words cut through him like a blade. His fingers twitched, his legs felt unsteady, but he refused to fall apart. Then whose were you? He whispered. Lisa glanced at the hooded man, and the way her eyes softened. Asterisk, asterisk, the way her body seemed to relax in his presence. Asterisk, asterisk, told Daniel everything. His fists clenched. You were with him the entire time? Lisa nodded. Before you. During you. After you. Daniel's heart pounded. His mind screamed in protest. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. Then why marry me? Lisa's expression darkened slightly. Because I needed time. Time for what? The hooded man finally answered. To remove you from the board without suspicion. Daniel turned to him, his blood running cold. What the hell does that mean? Lisa stepped forward. Daniel, she said, and for the first time, there was something almost tender in her voice. You were the perfect cover. You kept me hidden while I built what I was meant to build. You gave me an identity to shield me. But when you started to become a liability, we had to prepare for your departure. Daniel's body went rigid. A liability? Lisa nodded slowly. You weren't supposed to cheat, Daniel, she admitted. We had another plan. A much cleaner way to make you disappear. A chill crawled up Daniel's spine. Cleaner way? Lisa's lips curled slightly. But you made it so much easier for us. Daniel took a shaky step back, every nerve in his body screaming that he was standing in front of something far bigger than himself. What are you, Lisa? He whispered. She smiled again, and this time it was something far more sinister. The future, she said. And Daniel knew in that moment that he was never supposed to leave that pier alive. Daniel's body tensed as the weight of Lisa's words sank in. His mind fought against the inevitable conclusion, but deep down he already knew this wasn't just betrayal. This was an execution. A slow, chilling realization crept through him. He had never been in control, not even for a moment. Lisa had orchestrated everything from the very beginning, and now, as he stood at the edge of the pier with nowhere to run, he finally understood the cruel elegance of it all. Daniel took a step back, but the hooded man mirrored him, closing the distance effortlessly. Lisa remained still, watching with a detached curiosity, as if this moment had already played out in her mind 1,000 times before. Lisa, Daniel said, his voice hoarse. You don't have to do this. She sighed, tilting her head slightly. Oh, Daniel, she murmured. It was never a question of if. It was only a matter of when. His pulse hammered in his ears. He needed a way out. Think, Daniel. Think. The hooded man shifted his stance, his fingers twitching at his side. A gun? A blade? Whatever it was, Daniel knew he wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. The wind howled through the empty pier, sending an eerie shiver down Daniel's spine. He glanced around, searching for anything, anyone, who might disrupt the carefully laid plan Lisa had set in motion. But the docks were empty, swallowed by the vast darkness of the night. Lisa stepped forward now, her gaze steady. You were always predictable, Daniel. You fell right into the trap. And now you'll disappear exactly the way we wanted. Daniel's chest heaved, desperation clawing at his throat. Why me? He demanded. Why not just leave? Why go to all this trouble? Lisa exchanged a glance with the hooded man before turning back to Daniel, amusement flickering in her eyes. Because you had something we needed. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. What? She took another step forward, lowering her voice to a whisper. Access. The pieces snapped into place like a final, devastating blow. His mind reeled as he realized the horrifying truth. His finances, his company, his connections. Lisa had used him as a key. A sharp laugh escaped her lips. Oh, don't look so surprised, darling. You always thought you were the mastermind, but in reality, you were just a bridge. And now that we're on the other side. Her smile widened. We don't need the bridge anymore. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He had seconds, before they made their move. The hooded man took another step and Daniel braced himself. If he was going down, he wasn't going down without a fight. Lisa exhaled, shaking her head slightly. Always so stubborn. Then she nodded. The hooded man lunged. Daniel twisted to the side, just narrowly avoiding the strike. He felt the wind of it whip past his face, the raw strength behind the blow nearly sending him off balance. He stumbled backward, his foot skimming the very edge of the dock. Lisa sighed. You're making this harder than it has to be. Daniel's mind raced. He had to act fast, think fast. His eyes darted around, searching for anything he could use. Then he saw it, a rusted metal pipe lying near a stack of crates. He dove for it, grabbing the cold metal just as the hooded man lunged again. This time Daniel swung. Crack. The impact sent the hooded man stumbling backward, a sharp grunt escaping him as he clutched his side. Daniel's adrenaline surged, he had seconds to turn the tide. Lisa's expression flickered with something new, annoyance. Daniel knew he couldn't win this fight, but he didn't need to. He just needed to escape. He turned and ran. The sound of pounding footsteps chased him as he weaved through the pier, his breath ragged, his mind screaming at him to keep going. He didn't know where he was running to, only that he had to get away before Lisa's plan reached its final stage. But then, bang! Pain exploded through his leg. Daniel collapsed, a sharp cry tearing from his throat. His vision blurred as he clutched at the wound, his hands slick with warm blood. He gasped, struggling to pull himself forward, but another set of footsteps approached. Lisa crouched beside him, tilting her head. I really hoped you wouldn't make a mess of things. Daniel gritted his teeth, his body trembling from the pain. You won't get away with this. Lisa let out a soft laugh. Oh, Daniel, she whispered, brushing a stray hair from his forehead. I already have. Then everything faded to black. A deep, throbbing pain pulled Daniel from the void of unconsciousness. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, everything was a blur. Shadows danced across the dimly lit room and a dull hum filled the air. His body ached, his leg burned, and his head swam as he tried to move. He was alive. But for how much longer? As his vision cleared, he took in his surroundings. He wasn't at the pier anymore. Instead, he was in a sterile, windowless room strapped to a chair. A single bulb overhead cast a harsh glow, leaving the corners of the space drowning in darkness. No doors, no windows, no obvious way out. Panic clawed at his chest, but he forced himself to breathe. Think, Daniel. Think. A soft clicking of heels echoed through the room. Then, Lisa stepped into view. Welcome back, she murmured, her voice smooth, controlled. She perched on a chair across from him, crossing her legs gracefully. I was worried we lost you for a moment there. Daniel's jaw tightened. Where the hell am I? Lisa smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. A place you don't need to concern yourself with. He yanked at the restraints. Tight. Too tight. Lisa sighed. Daniel, really? Let's not waste time pretending you have a way out of this. His pulse pounded. So what now? You kill me? Lisa leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. That depends on you. Daniel narrowed his eyes. What the hell does that mean? She tilted her head. You're not dead yet because I need something from you. One last thing before we wipe you off the board for good. His stomach twisted. Another game. Another trap. Lisa pulled out a sleek tablet, tapping the screen. A familiar interface flashed before his eyes, his banking app. His personal accounts. His entire financial empire sat in the palm of her hand. His blood ran cold. How? Lisa grinned. I told you, darling. You were a bridge. And bridges lead to many interesting places. Daniel's mind raced. If she had access to his finances, she had everything. His assets, his security vaults, his offshore accounts, all of it. Lisa tapped the screen again, and a blank transaction form appeared. "All you have to do," she said, "is authorize one final transfer." Daniel clenched his fists. "And if I don't?" Lisa leaned back, feigning disappointment. "Then we do this the hard way. And trust me, Daniel, I would prefer to avoid that." "But," her gaze sharpened, "I won't hesitate." His mind spun. He needed time, a distraction, a weakness, anything. And then he saw it. A glint of silver at Lisa's hip. A gun. A plan started forming, a reckless, desperate plan. He had seconds to make his move, or he'd never get another chance. He let out a slow, shuddering breath. "Fine." Lisa's eyes gleamed. "Good choice." She turned the tablet toward him. "Go on then." His fingers hovered over the screen, but instead of typing, he lunged. Crack. He slammed his head into Lisa's, sending her reeling. The impact rattled his skull, but adrenaline surged through him. Lisa cursed, reaching for her gun, but Daniel was faster. His fingers closed around the weapon just as the door burst open. The hooded man. Daniel didn't hesitate. He spun, raised the gun, and fired. Bang. The man staggered, gripping his shoulder as blood bloomed through his dark clothing. He snarled but remained standing, his body tense with rage. Daniel turned back to Lisa, his chest heaving. The gun trembled in his grip, but he steadied himself. "We're done playing your game." Lisa, to his surprise, smiled. "You finally get it?" she whispered. Daniel didn't have time to process the words before the lights cut out. Total darkness. And then, a whisper in his ear. "You never had a way out, Daniel." Then the world exploded. A deafening roar ripped through the darkness, swallowing Daniel whole. The shockwave sent him sprawling, the gun flying from his grip as debris rained down around him. His ears rang, his vision flickering in and out, but through the chaos, he forced himself to move. He had to move. Pain radiated through his leg as he crawled forward, his fingers scraping against cold concrete. Smoke filled his lungs and the scent of burning plastic stung his nose. He could barely see through the haze, but he knew. He had seconds, maybe less, before Lisa made her next move. Then a voice. Low, amused, untouched by the carnage. "Still fighting, Daniel?" "Lisa." He turned sharply, forcing himself to his feet, his body swaying from the impact of the blast. Through the smoke, he could just make out her silhouette, calm, unshaken. She stepped forward, hands behind her back, watching him as if she were merely observing a chessboard, waiting for the final piece to fall. Daniel clenched his fists. "You blew up your own operation?" His voice was raw, filled with disbelief. Lisa gave a soft laugh. "Oh, Daniel. You never did understand, did you?" He took a shaky step forward. "Understand what?" She smiled, slow and knowing. "That this was never about you." His breath caught in his throat. Lisa reached into her coat and pulled out a small, sleek device. A detonator. Another one. Daniel's blood turned to ice. "You're insane." She tilted her head. "No. I'm free." Before he could react, she pressed the button. Another explosion. The walls trembled. The ground beneath him cracked. Fire licked at the edges of the room as metal beams groaned and collapsed. Daniel staggered back, shielding his face from the blast. This wasn't an escape. This was a purge. Lisa was burning everything down, including herself. Through the chaos, she looked at him one last time, an almost wistful expression crossing her face. "You were just a piece, Daniel. But I had to let you believe you were the king." And then she was gone. Swallowed by the fire, the smoke, the crumbling ruins of everything she had built. Daniel had no time to process it. No time to feel the weight of it. The building was coming down, and if he didn't get out, he would be buried along with it. Summoning every last ounce of strength, he turned and ran. The hallway was collapsing behind him, flames biting at his heels. His lungs screamed for air, but he pushed forward, refusing to slow down. He had to live. He had to survive. The exit loomed ahead, a sliver of light cutting through the smoke. He lunged for it, and then everything went black. Daniel awoke to the sound of distant sirens. His body ached, his skin was streaked with soot, but he was alive. He lay on cold asphalt, the night sky stretching above him. The building, Lisa's empire, was nothing more than a smoldering ruin. The fire painted the skyline in hues of orange and red, a fitting end to the game he never realized he was playing. The sirens grew louder. Blue and red lights flickered against the night. Shadows moved toward him, police, paramedics, people shouting his name. He barely registered any of it, because in his hand, still clutched tightly, was a small device. A USB drive. Lisa's final move. His heart pounded as he stared at it, realization slamming into him. She hadn't just been destroying evidence, she had been leaving him with the last piece of the puzzle. A twisted gift. A final checkmate. Daniel's fingers tightened around the drive as he let out a shuddering breath. Lisa may have burned everything to the ground, but she hadn't erased herself completely. And now it was his turn to decide what to do next.